Welcome everybody to the Tripolitan. My name is Rafat Yamak. I know it's been a couple of weeks that I've done my last episode, but I'm back on, and I'm hoping with this latest episode that you will find it informative and appealing. I attempt to focus on Muslim communities or topics that are not given the appropriate attention. And there is a specific community, a Muslim community, all the way near the Caucasus Mountains in a territory called Abkhazia. And today we'll learn more about this territory, the Muslims in that area, from an Abkhazian Muslim. His name is Meurad Osman. Meurad Osman, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for having me.
So Meurad Osman, just a quick bio, is a student of knowledge, a teacher, instructor, and freelance translator based in New Jersey. He comes from a Circassian background and is keen on maintaining his Islamic and Circassian identity and furthering his studies. I know that doesn't do you much justice, Murad, but it's a very interesting background. Would you mind just kind of explaining to us your background from your maternal and paternal side and just a little family history?
Sure. So my name is Meurad Osman. I was born here in New Jersey, in the USA. I come from a Syrian Circassian background. So what that means is that although I was born here in the States, both my parents are Syrian Circassians that were born in Syria and later immigrated to the US, right? Mm-hmm. So on my dad's side, I come from a Circassian family called Bagh, from the Abkhazia tribe, right, which is one of the major Circassian tribes. Mm-hmm. They were from a village in the Golan Heights known as Ain Ziwan. Ain Ziwan was a village where my father's side of the family came from. Mm-hmm. But of course, after the 1967 war with the Zionists, with the Golan Heights being seized and incorporated into their territory, many Circassians had to leave the Golan Heights and the various villages within it and surrounding it to the more major Syrian cities such as Damascus and Halab and Homs. So on my relation to my mom's side, she also was born in Syria, and her village was known as Salmaniya, right? Mm-hmm. Also in the Golan Heights, but once again, after the seizing of the Golan Heights by the Zionists, her family eventually relocated to the Muhajirin district in Damascus.
Interesting. So both your parents basically are from a Circassian background.
Yes.
Okay. And do your parents happen to know which areas in the Caucasus Mountains that they're from specifically? Like, I know there's many disparate territories mm-hmm. in that area. Anything mm-hmm. in particular? I know you had mentioned before that you're on your maternal side, they're from a territory named Abkhazia.
Yeah. From my maternal side, yes. My mother's side, they're what we would call Abaza, right? Mm-hmm. Or Abaza. Mm-hmm. In other words, these are the native inhabitants on the Black Sea coast. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're called Abkhaz or Abkhazians, mm-hmm. Or just Abaza. Mm-hmm. They're native to the Black Sea coast. So my ancestors, from her side, she comes from a family or a tribe called Aruta. Mm-hmm. They're a tribe or a family from that region, right? We don't know that much more than that or much more about that, mm-hmm. Other than our family name, okay. Which is, like I said, Aruta. Although afterwards, when my mother's side of the family moved to the Middle East, they adopted the last name of Al-Jarrah. Right? Oh. Yeah. So Al-Jarrah would be the family name in Syria, but the original or the Abaza last name would be known as Aruta.
Okay.
Or Jetkar in some cases. We also have a name known as Jetkar, which also is a word used for our family as well.
Okay, and your father is also from the same area?
My father is a Circassian, but from the self-designation, as we call it, Adiga, right? So Circassians would call themselves Adiga. And the Adiga and the Abazans, or the Abaza or the Abkhaz, the Adiga and the Abkhaz are very ethnically related. So it's more or less, both sides accept each other as their own. As far the history of them in terms of their language, their struggle against the Russians. They share a common ancestry. They share similar linguistic backgrounds. So they more or less look at each other like brotherly nations, and more or less, intermarriage between them is not a problem. Intermingling between them is not a problem because of how closely related they are to each other. So intermarriage between Adiga and Abaza is very common.
Okay, yeah, I did an episode with Bater Kadkoy on the Circassian community and Adiga. And so basically, it's just to refresh everyone's memory, Adiga, basically this territory or this area, please correct me by the way if I'm using any of these terms wrong, it would basically be above the Caucasus Mountains. Is Abkhazia below the Caucasus or above the Caucasus? Like, I look at the Caucasus Mountains as that divider, basically.
So Abkhazia, that would be an interesting question. Do you classify as North Caucasus or South Caucasus? Because Abkhazia is literally, we're talking about being on the edge of the Black Coast, right? Black Sea coast, sorry. So you could say it is somewhat of a intermediary area when it comes to being in the Caucasus because it's right on the edge of the Black Sea. But I would say in terms of its cultural and heritage roots, it would, because of the cultural and more heritage roots it has to the Adiga, or the Circassians, I would say it fits probably more in line with the North Caucasus. Right? Okay. So it would be, Abkhazians would, definitely be much more related, much more connected to the Adiga and to, the various tribes of the Adiga than, for example, compared to the Georgians or Armenians or, other peoples of the South Caucasus.
Very interesting. Subhanallah, Murad, this whole area, like every time I try to study it, and you want to try not to sound as ignorant as possible. Yeah. There's just so many groups over there, and you're always kind of careful not to, put everybody in the same group. You want to give each nuance its due credit, and that's why I'm kind of when I try to tackle this topic, I try not to sound as ignorant as possible. Yeah. Because of the different groups involved. Yeah. But so basically, Abkhazia, it kind of came into the news back during the Russian-Georgian War. I think it was in 2008, correct?
During the breakaway between the Abkhazian breakaway, yes. Yes.
And so basically, Abkhazia broke away, South Ossetia broke away. And it was kind of big news because Georgia was broken up. Yeah. But I guess what I wanted to ask is, are these territories actually Georgian, or were they incorporated by Georgia sometime in history?
So when it comes to Abkhazia specifically in places like Ossetia, South Ossetia, obviously you have, before the Russian conquest, the imperial conquest, right, of the 1800s, you basically had all these different, nations of the Caucasus, having conflicts and disputes and rivalries, but for the most part living, in peace, living, this is my land, this is your land, you stay here, I stay here, we don't mess with each other. But once the Russian imperial forces began their campaign in the Caucasus and began taking more and more land, eventually, as you probably heard in the other podcast you had about the Circassian Russian War, or the Caucasian Russian War, eventually Russia sadly won and incorporated all of the Caucasus, including the South Caucasus, right, into their empire, right? So all of that was considered under Russian territory, and then obviously when you had the transition from Russia being an empire or a monarchy, going into becoming a communist, USSR entity, Still those lands were under the USSR, right? And how those lands began to be divided, right? They would be divided, for example, into different republics, right? So you have, for example, Kabardino-Balkaria, Karachay-Cherkessk, right? You have Abkhazia, you have Ossetia. These, kind of artificial borders, as we know that the colonists like to do, kind of, made kind of also added to the tension because they knew it would be in their benefit to group, rival clans or rival tribes in the same area.
Right.
So that way they could never unite in revolt or in, secession. So obviously Abkhazia was, more or less during the Soviet era, especially under Stalin, who himself was an ethnic Georgian, put under, you could say, Georgia, right? So you could say the Abkhazian entity or the Abkhazian land was put under the Georgian, or grouped together with Georgia, and that was, not by accident. But definitely Abkhazians themselves, don't consider themselves Georgians, neither ethnically or linguistically. And as we know, there was a war that happened in the early 90s in relation to the Abkhazians trying to break free of Georgia rule.
Would you kind of go into more? So this war, I'm not actually familiar with the Abkhazian attempt to break away from Georgia. Is this like during the breakup of the Soviet Union, basically?
Yeah. So as we know, once the USSR broke down, you had a lot of different states within the former USSR breaking away, right? So you had, for example, a lot of the Central Asian territories, like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, broke away after the dismantling of the USSR. And likewise, that yearning to be an independent nation, also a lot of it was also within the Caucasus, right? So it goes without saying, we know the situation in Chechnya. We know the Chechen struggle for independence after the collapse of the USSR. So you also had that fervor, you could say, also amongst the Abkhaz, right? So when you had by the fall of the August, I think it was the fall of the Soviet Union, 1991, right? By August 1992, right? You had the Georgian troops coming in because the Abkhaz had declared independence, right? The Abkhazian parliament had basically declared independence and saying we are our own entity, we are not part of Georgia. So this was in the early 90s where they broke away and also were part of that fervor in trying to, have become a self-governing nation instead of being under the USSR.
It's so interesting, because this context that you provided kind of sheds light on the 2008 Russian-Georgian War, and it shows you that the Russians, they utilized, so when they grouped Abkhazia and South Ossetia with Georgia, they knew that it was a artificial union, and they kind of then used it against Georgia when Georgia was becoming pro-Western.
Yes.
And they ignited that card, and they basically supported the breakaway republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They've become kind of basically Russian satellite states, right?
Yeah.
In the area.
Yeah,
So
that's probably the best way to describe Abkhazia right now.
Yeah.
It's heavily funded and financed by Russia.
Yeah.
Because Russia is basically the main entity that you could say accepted its independence or recognized its independence from Georgia. Like you said, because of Georgia's alignment with NATO or with the West, Russia used this as a way of getting at Georgia for shifting on to the Western power ideology, if you want to say.
Well, it's Abkhazia was in the news maybe a couple of years ago, at least pertaining to the Middle East. I think the Abkhazian prime minister, he visited Syria and he met with Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of weird,
Yeah.
because they were making the Syrian state TV, as desperate as they are, they're trying to make something big out of it.
Yeah.
The prime minister of this, state, which is really like a Russian principality, is coming to visit Bashar al-Assad, and they were desperate to look for something. So that's when Abkhazia really, everybody's like, who's Abkhazia in the Middle East?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the sad reality, is that because Abkhazia is so dependent on Russia, or so much in the shadow of Russia, it's going to basically follow, I don't know if the expression follow in suit or follow in line with Russian foreign policy. So they obviously can't, in terms of their foreign policy, do something that goes against Russian foreign policy in relation to how they deal with other states. So obviously, if Russia has a good relationship with Syria or with Bashar al-Assad and the regime, then by extension, Abkhazia is going to also maintain that. Not just because of the fact that they have to follow in line with Russian foreign policy, but you also have a lot of ethnic Abkhaz or ethnic Abkhaz who are in Syria, right? You have a lot of Syrian, a lot of the Circassian community within Syria are ethnically Abkhaz or Abkhaz.
Right. Okay, interesting. Then I guess that kind of just leads me to my next point, which is really the Muslim community in Abkhazia. If you had to give me like a percentage of Muslims in Abkhazia, what would it be? I don't know if there's any statistics.
Yeah.
But I guess a ballpark estimate.
So the statistics vary. So even like finding statistics in terms of what denomination. So in Abkhazia, you basically have three main religious groups. You have the Christian Orthodox. You also have a small minority that holds on to pagan belief systems. And then you have the Muslim community, the Muslim population. So some statistics will list them at 10%, some statistics will list them at 30% or 35%. But sad thing is, unfortunately, in terms of being Abkhazia itself, they're not the majority, right? Although they are a presence, they are something that is, you can't ignore them, right? You can't, they're not so much of a minority that you can just simply ignore them and forget they're there. They aren't the majority in terms of Abkhazia. But if you look at the Abkhaz or the Abaza who are outside of Abkhazia, and that is the majority, by the way, the majority of Abkhazians or Abaza are actually outside of Abkhazia. Right? Okay. Abkhazians you could say Abkhazians themselves are a minority in their country. The majority of the Abkhazians outside of Abkhazia are, alhamdulillah, the majority of them are Muslim, Sunni Muslims who follow more often than not the Hanafi school of fiqh. But in terms of, that's outside of Abkhazia. So outside of Abkhazia, 99.9% are, Sunni Muslims. But in terms of inside Abkhazia, they're a minority in terms of their numbers, usually looking at 10 to 30%.
It's the heterogeneity of the religious denominations in the Caucasus. It's like you never have like one religious group dominating another. It's always a bunch of scattered. Like if you had to put like a map and each denomination represented a color, it would just be like dots all over the place. You know what I mean? And for me, it's I look at it that okay, Georgia is majority Christian, but then you go just a little bit up, and Abkhazia, they accepted Islam, I guess more so compared to the Georgians.
Yeah, definitely.
And you wonder what are the dynamics? How did that happen? Where there's such a stark difference in religious observance or religious acceptance of Islam. Compared to Abkhazia and Georgia. Is there kind of an explanation for that, or is it just tribes, kind of like the Arabian tribes? When the leader accepts, the whole population accepts.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you had, so how Islam arrived to Abkhazia was more or less through Ottoman influence, right? So either through, the Ottoman influence could have been trade, or the fact that the land was administered by the Ottoman Empire and conquered by the Ottoman Empire. And there were definitely a lot of princes, Abkhazian princes, and Circassian princes too, who accepted Islam. And we know this from the seerah. We know that one of the ways the Prophet ﷺ gave da'wah is that he would give da'wah. One of the people you want to give attention a lot towards in da'wah is to the leaders, right? Because when you give da'wah to the leader and the leader accepts a religion or a way of life, more often than not, everyone under his authority will follow suit and also fall into following that, right? And we also know from the seerah, the Prophet ﷺ would send different letters to different rulers, instructing them to embrace Islam, right? And letting them know that if they didn't, then they would be accountable for all the people who would remain in disbelief, remain in ignorance, remain in blasphemy because of their, refusal to accept Islam. So definitely the way in which, Islam spread through Abkhazia, the princes did have a role in that, from the Ottoman Empire, giving da'wah and helping the spread of Islam in that area. Also, I could say too, in terms of the cultural, like Circassians, we have this concept of what's called khabza, which is kind of like this unspoken honor code about being chivalrous, courageous, being, having hospitality towards the other, respecting your elders, respecting women. It's kind of like this, like I said, this unspoken code of honor. So one of the reasons that a lot of our ancestors said was a way by which a lot of our people embraced Islam is because we found that this honor code that we had, these values that we cherish, were actually highly praised and emphasized in Islam, right? So transitioning to Islam, these high values and this honor code that we have, when we embraced Islam, we didn't lose any of that. We only gained more by coming into the folds of the religion.
And because as you mentioned before, the Soviet Union, they took over, North Caucasus, South Caucasus. And do you feel like there is some kind of solidarity between different Muslim territories in the ex-Soviet Union? Like, for example, let's say Muslim Abkhazians with Chechens, Dagestanis, people from, Circassians who still reside in Sochi. Is there kind of like that, like a solidarity movement going on between those groups, or is it kind of like everyone's focused on their own cause?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is a solidarity in terms of, when you look at all these people from all these different peoples from the North Caucasus, right? The Dagestanis, the Chechen, the Ingush, the Osset, the Circassians, the Balkars, the Karachay, the Abkhaz. All of us, although we're all our kind of independent peoples, we all live in the North Caucasus region, right? So we come from a common, homeland. We have a common culture, right? The culture is very much similar between all these groups. The clothing is very similar. The food is similar. Although linguistically there are differences, right? Obviously between the Adiga language, the Abaza language, the Chechen language, the English language, there'll be some differences. I think it's the common heritage, the common homeland, the common heritage, the common religion. So the majority of us are Muslim, right? Also, the common struggle that we had to endure from the Russians, right? Yeah. Everybody had, all of these nations that we mentioned, including the Abkhaz, including the Abazans, right, suffered under the Russian expansion into the Caucasus, right? And this is proven not just in the history records, but it's proven by today, where we know most Abkhazians, most people from an Abkhaz or Abaza background don't live in their homeland anymore, right? Yeah. And that's because of Russian imperial aggression in their homeland, where they drove them out, right? So I definitely think a lot of these factors, a common religion, a common homeland, a common struggle, a common culture, it allows us, all of us who come from a North Caucasus background, to have a sense of solidarity with each other.
Right? SubhanAllah, Murad, you bring up a good point, and that's kind of when the Russian-Georgian War was going on in 2008. Most Muslims, they were supporting Georgia at the time because Russian imperialism is, as you know, as ruthless as ever. And the most recent example is in Syria, where they've obliterated entire cities and towns to prop up Assad. And so we were all or a lot of Muslims were supporting Georgia against Russia. And when Abkhazia kind of broke away, everybody was saying, or most people were saying, oh, this is really bad, And it's it reminds me of Crimea. When Russia annexed Crimea, you had most Muslims saying, oh no, Crimea is Ukrainian. But in reality, Crimea is Crimea. It's neither Ukrainian nor Russian, right? And Abkhazia is the same way. It's neither Georgian or Russian.
Exactly. And you bring up another important point I want to talk about, which is basically this idea where the enemy of my enemy is my friend,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an absolute, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the enemy of your enemy could also be your enemy. If that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I don't just assume, for example, because, okay, Russia is anti-US imperialism, that automatically makes them the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I do see that with some Muslims who have a high opinion of Russia
Yeah.
and praise their foreign policy and praise their leader and praise, them, as if they're saints.
Yeah.
And I always have to remind these people, like, are you aware of what these people, or what, this country and its history did to my people and to the other Muslims of the Caucasus?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what they did to the Tatars in Crimea? Do you know what they did to the Muslims in Central Asia?
Mm-hmm.
You guys are simply praising them and thinking highly of them because outwardly they're the opponent to, Western, American imperialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're against, this Western American imperialism and oppression of these countries in the Middle East. Totally, we're against that. But that doesn't automatically make Russia the good guy, because like you just mentioned, Russia is also guilty of atrocities and crimes in Syria, right?
Yeah.
And they have a history of oppressing their Muslim peoples,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just concluding, I'm not here to make any, I'm just going to say you have this guy like Imran Hussein,
Oh, yeah.
who is,
That guy's
basically,
insane.
basically speaking about the Russians and the Russian Orthodox Church as if they're awliya,
Yeah.
speaking about them as if they're the saviors and that we need to be aligned with them and that they are our brethren, and then he's painting them, like I said, as if they're awliya.
Yeah.
And me, someone who's relatively speaking, not that long ago, my ancestors suffered under the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
and lost their homeland and lost, a large vast of information related to family background and genealogy and lineage. And like I said, I'm not just saying this because, okay, Circassians oppressed. I'm not just saying this because Russians oppressed Circassians or Abkhazians, right?
Mm-hmm.
They also oppressed the Chechens. They also committed atrocities against the Chechens, the Chechens, the Dagestanis, the Ingush, right? The other peoples of the Caucasus. They also did it, like I said, in Crimea. And even you have them oppressing themselves. You had Stalin, who killed millions of his own people,
Yep.
right? So you trying to paint the Russians, my final point in this, you trying to paint the Russians as the good guys,
Mm-hmm.
simply because they are outwardly against America, is really faulty.
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough. Just because they're against America, that's not enough to all of a sudden forget the atrocities they committed in the past and the atrocities they're committing today.
Yeah, well, it's very elementary thinking.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of people, I'm sure you know this one Palestinian thinker, Abdel Bari Atwan, for example, who he's this Palestinian thinker, and he used to be very famous,
Mhm.
and when this, with Arab Spring happened, he would he supported the Egyptian revolution, but when it came to Syria, because it
Yeah.
was Russian backed, he started, freaking out. Anyways, long story short, I mean, the purpose of this episode, to be frank with you, and kind of shedding light on the Caucasus, is
Mhm.
because it's so unknown among the Muslim community.
Yeah.
People don't really know what happened.
Yeah. Exactly.
And, people might see you, Murad, with all due respect, and they'll be like, oh, he's just a Turk. You know?
I get that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll just think you're a Turk. Oh, everything's cool.
Yeah. Or a
But
Bosnian
no, yeah,
or from the Balkans.
you have
Yeah.
exactly, but you have a story.
Yeah.
And people just because you're white, okay, this guy is a Turk, he's good.
Yeah.
And really, I swear, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover, like Abkhazia and
Yeah.
Adiga and Ingush, inshallah, later and maybe in the
No,
future.
Jazakallah khairan. It's actually a great honor to be, for me personally, to be shedding light on these regions and the people and
Allah barak
the
feek. It's
Islam in
great.
those areas. For you to take an interest, and believe me, for you to take an interest in that just means so much to us.
Alhamdulillah.
For you who's not from that region, to take an interest in the Muslims of that region and their history and their culture and their lineages, that just means so much to us, that there's people out there who are interested in us, and that shows that the attempts to wipe us out and to make history forget about us have failed. So it really means a lot. Thank you. Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, wa iyyakum. طيب, if somebody wanted to learn a bit more, would you have any references, like books or possibly podcasts or lectures that somebody could listen to
Yeah.
Just for the audience.
In terms of books, usually there's one book I heard I see people having an interest in. I think it's called Sabers of Paradise.
Mm-hmm.
But I myself went through this book, and I found a lot of the things in there just coming from my own background as a descendant of that region to be just kind of false.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say if you want to learn more about Muslims from the Caucasus, the best thing would be to speak to a Muslim from that region, or
Mm-hmm.
speak to a Muslim who comes from that region,
Mm-hmm.
because there are a lot of even me learning about my homeland, even though I haven't been able to visit it. Even for me, it's a journey, it's a progress,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of Circassians and a lot of people from the diaspora, or who we call the Muhajirin diaspora, the people who had to leave the Caucasus after the war. It's not an easy thing to be removed from your homeland for so long, and later on you find out that you're from this place, and your ancestors were killed, and you lost your homeland, and you were removed, and you were exiled. So it's kind of hard to start from zero to learn about your own background,
Right.
So even for me, I'm still learning about my background. I'm still learning about my people. I'm still learning about our history. So I would say if you can find a person from that background, or if you can find a credible, series or source on the internet which talks about the history.
Mm-hmm.
I think Al Jazeera recently made a video about the Circassians.
Yeah.
They have some videos explaining. I went through them. I found them to be pretty much historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look you search Circassians on Al Jazeera and the various videos they have about them.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to start from there, I think it would be good.
Inshallah, that's good to know, because obviously I hope, inshallah, with this episode, people will want to learn more about Abkhazia and the territory in general, inshallah.
Yeah.
With that, Brother Murad, I really appreciate your time. Jazakallah khair. I had a great time with you, and
Likewise.
I really appreciate all the information that you've given us.
At your service.
And I hope that one day you can go back and visit your homeland,
Inshallah.
and maybe even reside there if things
Yeah.
become stable.
I have some relatives who are actually there right now.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, following the war in Syria, I have a large section of my mother's family who lives there right now.
Subhanallah, man. It's so it's just amazing that they came from that area to Syria. And
Yeah.
Subhanallah, Syria went into total anarchy.
Yeah.
And now they kind of went back to where they started.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's a fascinating story.
It is. Yeah.
طيب, Jazakallah khair, Murad. Thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you for listening in today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave any comments, and I will direct them to Murad, and maybe Murad can answer them, inshallah.
No problem, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thanks again, everybody, and have a good night.